I've spoken in quite a lot of detail about Resident Evil 7 and how, of course, it is very much going to be different from what you would consider the classic Resident Evil experience. And Capcom themselves have been pretty talkative about this particular game, as well as, of course, the demo, which is going to be hitting PC soon. And rest assured, I will be playing it on the channel. I'm sure you guys have seen it already on PS4, but, I thought you might appreciate my input on the actual demo gameplay rather than my analysis of everything derived from it. But we have some comments from Capcom's marketing team about Resident Evil 7. Now, of course, as I just said, when it was first revealed, it was a pretty drastic change and shift from what consumers expected of Resident Evil, and this news, while it has of course been a little bit divisive in its change of direction, it's been pretty welcome, especially after Resident Evil 6, and it was also welcome to Capcom's marketing team as well. Now I have some comments here from the EMEA marketing director Antoine Millant, and he said, quote, "The first time we heard about the project was very shortly after they started developing it. It was back in early 2014. It brought a broad smile to the entire crowd because it was a massive change in terms of the game's perspective, obviously. Our first reaction internally was probably the same as the gamers. How is this a Resident Evil title? How is this going to connect to Resident Evil as a whole? So we obviously spent a lot of time with the dev team talking about the game. You see that in the very recent previews that came out where people were saying, yes, the camera perspective has changed. What makes the real core of the game is survival horror. I was really pleased to see in the previews that a number of journalists were drawing parallels between the first game and 7 despite the massive gap between the two. Things like puzzles, inventory, item management, save rooms, and so on. At its core, more than the characters or the lore, Resident Evil is about being scared to open a door because you don't know what's on the other side. That's the kind of feeling you find in Resident Evil 7 as well. And that's something I've actually touched on myself, as obviously people have, or rather were, because obviously I think it's kind of been mostly dying down, is the change of perspective did make people concerned that it was going to be a huge change in direction and turn Resident Evil into sort of an Outlast or Amnesia style game where you just run and hide and you can't actually fight back, which is not what Resident Evil has ever been about. It has been old school survival horror. It's been a bit more camp than say Silent Hill, but it is still that old school survival horror where you item management, you've got to manage your ammo, you've got to manage your health items, you've got to manage your inventory space, all of this stuff. And as more and more information came out about the demo and we saw more and more gameplay and details come out, all of these elements still seem to be there. You still had combat, you still had, hey, you got to manage your ammo. Ammo's going to be limited, these enemies are going to be pretty hard to take down. It's going to be very about that old style that we're so used to, despite the change in perspective and the change in direction from Resident Evil 5 and 6. And of course 4 as well. As much as I love 4, that was more action based alongside 5 and 6, although 4 was actually a really, really good game, unlike 6, which is a travesty that shouldn't exist. And after the sort of bombastic, we've gone too far, we've jumped the shark, that was 6. This entry, of course, feels much more refined and restrained in comparison. And Millant says on this, quote, "We took the direction, starting with 4, there's a crowd for that as well, and lots of people love that. For a long-lasting IP like Resident Evil, you need to reinvent yourself on a regular basis while keeping the core nature of why your game is good. I think the first 3 Resident Evil games and the spin-offs were part of a trilogy, but 4, 5 and 6 presented a departure with different camera angles and so on. You think that 7 and what comes next are also a new take on the Resident Evil franchise. It's an interesting exercise. It can sometimes be a bit scary for gamers and the dev team as well. I don't think this game was focus tested before they started development, but these guys identified clearly what Resident Evil was, putting that in the present day, taking inspiration and influences from modern horror movies and games as well." To be honest, as I've said many times, I'm glad of this change of direction. Resident Evil 7 is definitely unexpected. I will admit that when we first saw that big reveal at E3, that I didn't expect it to be Resident Evil as I was watching it, but as I say, the more I've learned, the more I've seen that it does keep that core of what made Resident Evil, it actually looks really, really promising, and actually more survival horror than the series has been in a long, long time, to be quite honest. As much as I love Resident Evil 4, as much as I think it's one of the best PS2 games of all time, it is very action-based. It had a different sort of back-against-the-wall, panicky style of horror in comparison to the more slow-paced, careful style of the first 3 games. So it's nice to see Resident Evil changing once again, to be honest. As much as 5 was an okay game, it wasn't brilliant as a Resident Evil game, and 6, as I keep saying, was pretty terrible. And it went way too far with the action. That was not Resident Evil anymore. It kind of became Gears of Resident Evil, to be honest. A just generic action game with zombies thrown in. So I'm kind of glad that they've got through their difficult teenage phase, as it were, and have gone back to survival horror. And hopefully Resident Evil 7 is successful for them, because, you know, it looks like they did focus tests. They decided this is what we want to do for Resident Evil, and they obviously are taking a little bit of a gamble. Hopefully it pays out. As I said, I've been watching a ton of content about this game, viewing all the screenshots and stuff. I haven't actually played it myself, because obviously it's only been on PS4. So I can't wait for the demo to come out in about, I think it's a week or so. It comes out the 19th, if I recall correctly. So it's going to be really interesting to finally delve into these mysteries myself. So that's me done for this video. Thank you very much for watching. The full interview will be linked in the description below. There's a bunch of stuff I didn't touch on here, so do check it out if you're at all interested. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.